The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched endlessly in shades of green as I eased the old Subaru up the winding road, the scent of pine and damp earth filling the car. I glanced at Lucas in the back seat, sprawled across a pile of blankets, earbuds dangling, and Emma pressed her face to the window, her nose fogging the glass as she traced invisible patterns. Their excitement was contagious, and for a moment I let myself breathe in the calm of this early autumn afternoon. At 68, I had learned to savor these small moments, the quiet before the rush of family activity. My hair was streaked silver, my hands a little stiff from years of typing catalog entries and shelving books at the public library, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in months. Driving up to this cabin, my late husband's idea for a weekend getaway, was supposed to be a balm, a way to connect with my grandchildren after a long summer apart. The cabin came into view at the crest of the hill, nestled between tall pines like a secret waiting to be discovered. Its stone chimney puffed lazy curls of smoke, and the wooden deck glistened faintly from the morning mist. I parked, and Lucas scrambled out first, bouncing in place with boundless energy, while Emma clutched my hand and dragged me forward, her small sneakers scuffing the gravel. I laughed, the sound mingling with the crisp mountain air, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't realized I'd been missing. We carried the suitcases inside, unpacking quickly so the kids could dash out onto the deck. The mountains rolled out before us in every direction, their peaks catching the golden light. And I felt that familiar blend of awe and serenity. The smell of cedar and damp leaves seeped through the cabin windows, anchoring me in the present. Lucas leaned against the railing, squinting at a hawk circling above, while Emma ran her fingers along the rough wood, whispering about the squirrels she hoped to find. I lingered in the doorway, watching them, letting the tension of city life dissolve into this secluded pocket of peace. Somewhere deep in the back of my mind, a quiet voice told me that not everything could be this simple, that even the most tranquil places could hide surprises. I shook it off and called them inside for lunch, unaware that in just a few moments, my phone would vibrate with a message that would change everything. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counter when my phone buzzed sharply against the wooden surface. Frowning, I picked it up, expecting a text from one of my book club friends or maybe a reminder about a prescription refill. Instead, the screen displayed a number I didn't recognize and a message that made my stomach seize. Leave quietly. Don't tell them. I dropped the phone onto the counter as if it were burning. My hands trembled slightly, and I could feel my pulse quicken in a way that was impossible to ignore. I glanced toward the sliding glass door, where Lucas was trying to balance on the deck railing, and Emma was chasing a chipmunk across the lawn. They were laughing, entirely unaware. My chest tightened. I picked up the phone again, reading the words over and over. Who would send something like this and why? My mind raced through every possible explanation, none of which seemed plausible. Perhaps it was a prank teenagers texting random numbers. No, the timing, the choice of words, the ominous tone. It felt deliberate, personal even. I could almost hear a shadow brushing along the edge of the cabin, though I knew the mountains were quiet this late morning. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself I was overreacting. The kids were safe. The cabin was secluded, and I wasn't the type to panic over unknown messages. And yet, a chill crept along my spine, prickling the back of my neck, whispering that this was more than a coincidence. Something about the phrasing, the demand for silence, the urgency made my stomach knot. I forced myself to breathe deeply, attempting to reason with the absurdity. Maybe someone had the wrong number. Maybe it was just a random warning meant for someone else. My thumb hovered over the reply button, indecision paralyzing me. Should I write back? Ignore it? Or impossibly go along with it? The children's laughter drifted through the open window. A tether to normalcy I clung to desperately. I tucked the phone into my pocket, unwilling to let them see the tension twisting my face. I needed to think, to understand, to figure out if this was real or the product of an overactive imagination fueled by the isolation and the serenity of the mountains. Even as I tried to convince myself it was nothing, I couldn't ignore the tight knot of anxiety coiling in my chest. That one message had changed the tone of the weekend entirely. It planted a seed of doubt, a shadow over the sunlit deck, a warning I could not shake. I stepped outside, letting the fresh mountain air fill my lungs, trying to push back the unease. But the words lingered, sharp and cold. Leave quietly. Don't tell them. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that my weekend was no longer just about laughter and pine-scented breezes. Something had shifted, and I could feel it in the way the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sense of urgency I could not ignore. I lingered at the edge of the deck, my hands gripping the railing a little tighter than necessary, staring at Lucas and Emma as they darted across the sun-dappled lawn. Their laughter was light and carefree, oblivious to the cold, heavy knot in my stomach. I told myself this was precaution, nothing more. Yet every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong. I slipped quietly back into the cabin, careful not to rouse the kids. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door and tucked the phone securely into the pocket. The anonymous message burned in my mind. Leave quietly. Don't tell them. I repeated it like a mantra, trying to steel myself. Each repetition made my chest tighten, made my thoughts spin faster. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I took a slow, deliberate step down the cabin steps. The gravel crunched faintly beneath my boots, a sound I tried to control, as if every footfall might alert invisible eyes watching from the tree line. The crisp mountain air was sharp in my lungs, filling me with a sense of both clarity and dread. I forced my legs to move, convincing myself that I was simply taking a walk, buying myself a moment to think. The kids' voices drifted faintly from the deck, and for a second I felt a pang of guilt. I wasn't abandoning them. I was acting on instinct, on a warning I didn't fully understand. Still, the heaviness in my chest pressed on me with the subtle authority of fear. I paused at a cluster of pine trees, listening to the wind sift through the needles. Nothing moved except for the occasional bird and the shadow of a squirrel darting along a branch. The mountains around me seemed vast, indifferent, and yet I felt exposed, like a single thread in a tapestry that could unravel at any moment. Every step I took felt like a negotiation with myself. Stay calm, I told myself. Stay rational. This could be nothing. But then my fingers brushed the phone in my pocket, and I felt the tremor of urgency all over again. Who had sent the message? How could they know I was here? At this particular cabin, with my grandchildren, I rounded a bend in the path behind the cabin and let myself inhale the scent of damp earth and cedar. My pulse slowed slightly, and I allowed a fragment of calm to settle over me, yet the tension never fully left. My muscles remained taut, my mind alert, every shadowed contour in the woods scrutinized with a cautious eye. I reached a small clearing and leaned against a tree, trying to focus. The kids' laughter was now a distant echo, comforting and cruel at the same time. I knew I had stepped beyond the familiar safety of the deck, into a space where I could only trust my own judgment. My chest tightened again as I realized that the weekend I had envisioned warm, cozy, filled with games and stories, was already gone. Something had shifted, subtle and immediate, and I couldn't ignore it. The message had forced my hand, and the quiet obedience I chose was not a choice at all, but a necessity. The path leveled out at a small clearing overlooking the valley below, a natural balcony framed by the evergreens. I paused, letting the wind whip against my face, trying to steady my racing heart. The mountains stretched endlessly in muted golds and deep greens, and for a fleeting moment, I imagined that the world was still ordinary, that this weekend could still be simple. But then I noticed him. He was sitting on a fallen log near the edge of the clearing, dressed in a charcoal jacket and khaki pants. His posture relaxed but deliberate. A pair of dark glasses shielded his eyes, and his hands rested lightly on a leather briefcase at his side. I froze, unsure whether to retreat or approach. Every instinct in me screamed caution, but there was something in the way he watched me that suggested purpose rather than malice. "Mrs. Whitmore." His voice was low, calm, measured, carrying a quiet authority that caught my attention. "Yes," I answered cautiously, my voice tighter than I intended. Who are you?" He lifted a hand in a polite gesture, as if to calm me. "My name is Ethan Parker. I work in accounting for your family's investments. I know this isn't a typical way to meet, but there isn't time for formalities. You need to hear me." My stomach clenched, and I took a step backward, keeping the trees between us. "Why here? Why like this? And how do you even know I'm alone?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I'm sorry for the secrecy. It wasn't my choice. But the situation is urgent. Your grandson, he's in trouble. Serious trouble. And it affects more than just his finances." I blinked, my mind struggling to connect the words. "Lucas, my sweet, bright-eyed grandson I don't understand," I whispered. "What are you saying?" He opened the briefcase slowly, tilting it toward me without reaching for anything inside. "I have documents, emails, and records of transactions. They're complicated, but the short version is this. Lucas has accrued debts with people who are dangerous, and he intends to use family assets to settle them. I'm not here to frighten you unnecessarily, but you need to know what's happening before it's too late." The wind caught a stray strand of my hair, and I brushed it back, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. This can't be true. He wouldn't, he's my grandson. He wouldn't do this." Ethan nodded, as if expecting my disbelief. "I understand. I had trouble believing it at first too, but the evidence is here." He tapped the side of the briefcase, the sound sharp in the clearing, and it's escalating. "I came here because I couldn't risk any delay. You're the only person who can act fast enough to protect yourself and them." I felt the weight of his words settle over me like a stone. The mountains that had moments ago seemed serene now felt ominous, pressing in with shadows that weren't really there. I wanted to run, to dash back to the cabin, to hug my grandchildren, and pretend none of this existed. But a part of me, the part that had lived long enough to recognize danger, knew that retreat wasn't safe. Not anymore. I took a deep breath and nodded slowly, the knot of fear in my chest tightening, but accompanied by a sliver of resolve. "All right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tell me everything, every last detail." Ethan's lips curved into a brief, grim smile. "I promise I will, but we have to move quickly." As I followed him down the narrow path into the shadows of the trees, I felt the full weight of the weekend I had imagined slip away. The laughter of Lucas and Emma echoed faintly behind me, a reminder of what was at stake, and I realized that nothing about this mountain cabin or this weekend would ever be simple again. Chapter 5. The Betrayal Revealed. We settled onto a moss-covered rock at the edge of the clearing, the mountain breeze brushing our faces as Ethan opened the briefcase fully. Inside were folders thick with papers, manila envelopes, and a slim laptop, all arranged with meticulous care. My pulse thudded painfully in my ears as he began to speak. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "I need you to understand the full scope of the situation. Lucas isn't just behind on bills or bad with money. He's deeply in debt over $500,000, and not to any ordinary lenders. These are people who don't forgive mistakes." I felt my stomach drop. $500,000 for a 12-year-old grandson or even a grown one. I would never have imagined it possible. He can't, I whispered. "Not my Lucas. He's my grandson." Ethan shook his head. "I wish it were that simple, but it gets worse. He's using manipulative tactics to access family assets, including trusts and investments tied to you. The documents I brought show he's attempting to gain control of properties that are legally yours." I swallowed hard, vision blurring with the sting of betrayal. Lucas, my bright, sweet boy, the one who begged me to tell stories and helped me pick the last roses from my garden, he would never hurt us. Would he? But the evidence Ethan presented was undeniable. There were spreadsheets showing transfers, emails to shadowy figures, and financial statements altered with meticulous precision. Why would he do this? My voice cracked. My hands trembled, brushing the papers Ethan had laid out. He's family. He's supposed to be my grandson." Ethan's expression was grim. "People can make choices we never expect. Mrs. Whitmore, desperation makes them reckless. From what I've pieced together, he believes using your assets is the only way to cover his debts, and he's counting on the fact that you would never suspect him." The words burned, sharp and bitter. I had raised him. I had spent years teaching him right from wrong, showing him what it meant to care for others, to act with integrity. And now the grandson I had adored might be planning to steal from me, possibly even putting me at risk. My chest felt tight, and I had to close my eyes to steady my breath. Ethan continued, opening a folder labeled Recent Transfers. He pointed to entries in my late husband's name and some newly signed documents. "See here, these transfers were initiated after Lucas convinced you to update your financial documents. Everything appears legitimate at first glance, but the intent is to give him access to your estate prematurely." I shook my head in disbelief. He wouldn't forge anything. He couldn't. He's my family. I know him." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I know this is hard." I had the same disbelief at first, but this isn't conjecture, it's a pattern, and it's escalating. If action isn't taken soon, he could succeed in gaining access before anyone else realizes what's happening. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the faint sounds of the cabin in the distance. Lucas's laughter, once comforting, now struck me like a knife. He was out there, playing, oblivious or perhaps deliberately unaware of how high the stakes had become. My heart pounded as I absorbed Ethan's words. Betrayal by family, the person I trusted most. My grandson, the thought twisted in my chest. A knot of shock, heartbreak, and fear. Every memory I had of him, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the pride in his first school recital, clashed with this cold reality of danger and deception. Ethan closed the folder carefully. "I know this is overwhelming, but you are the only one who can act fast enough to protect yourself and your grandchildren from potential harm. You need to be cautious, and you need to act." I nodded slowly, the weight of realization pressing me into the earth beneath us. My hands gripped the rough rock as my mind spun with questions and terror. The safe weekend I had envisioned the laughter, the mountains. The peace was gone. All that remained was a choice trust. strategize, and confront the threat, or be consumed by it. Ethan motioned for me to sit on a flat boulder near the clearing, the wind carrying the scent of pine and damp earth around us. He opened his laptop carefully, placing it between us. The screen glowed, and for a moment, the faint reflection of the mountains made it feel unreal, as if the betrayal he was about to show me belonged to another world entirely. "Look," he said softly, his finger hovering over the touchpad. "These are the emails Lucas sent to his creditors and associates. I've printed the copies too, just in case." I leaned in, trying to make sense of the small font, the technical language, the cold efficiency of his words. One email described in meticulous detail how Lucas planned to redirect payments from client accounts to cover gambling debts. Another outlined steps to gain access to family investments, including the property in Asheville that my husband and I had purchased decades ago. My stomach dropped as I realized the level of calculation involved. Ethan handed me a folder labeled Altered Documents. I opened it gingerly, my fingers shaking. Inside were copies of my own signature on documents I had recently signed for estate planning. But the contents were wrong. Pages had been replaced. Clauses inserted without my knowledge. My eyes widened as the horror settled in. Lucas had forged not just the numbers, but the very intent of the documents, making it appear as though I had willingly handed over control of my assets. I sank onto the rock, gripping the edges as if they could hold me together. He did this," I whispered, disbelief making my voice tremble. "All of it." Ethan's gaze was steady. "It's not just the money, Mrs. Whitmore. It's the timing, the method. He assumed you'd never verify each page. That's why I had to come now. If he succeeds, it's more than theft, it could put you in danger." I closed my eyes, the mountains around me suddenly feeling far away, distant and indifferent. Every memory of Lucas, the laughter, the scraped knees I'd kissed, the stories we read before bedtime clashed violently with this image of him manipulating, deceiving, and scheming against the family he claimed to love. My heart felt hollow, a tight, unyielding grip of fear and sorrow. Ethan continued, pulling up a spreadsheet on the laptop. "And here, these are the financial manipulations, small at first, subtle, almost imperceptible, but they're accelerating. If unchecked, they could compromise the accounts entirely within weeks." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. Weeks. The word felt impossibly long, a countdown to disaster I couldn't stop. I thought of the children back at the cabin, unaware, playing, laughing. My chest tightened, a mixture of guilt and urgency pressing down on me. Ethan leaned closer. "And there's more." I cross-referenced recent communications and found patterns in behavior that are concerning. He's desperate, reckless, and increasingly dangerous. I wouldn't have come if I didn't believe immediate action was necessary. A cold chill ran through me, and I shivered despite the warm afternoon sun. The idyllic weekend, the mountains, the laughter of my grandchildren. It all felt like a fragile illusion, hanging by a thread. The betrayal was undeniable, and the threat wasn't just financial. It was personal. It was a shadow pressing in, a threat I could no longer ignore. I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to summon courage. I had raised him, nurtured him, trusted him, and now I had to face the unbearable truth someone I loved, someone I had poured years of care and hope into, could destroy everything I had worked for. Ethan's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "We need to move quickly. I can guide you, but you must decide what to do next." I opened my eyes, meeting his steady gaze. The horror and dread that had coiled inside me began to sharpen into clarity. There was no denying the evidence. There was no room for hesitation. The time for caution had passed. The forest around us seemed unusually silent. The usual rustle of wildlife replaced by the steady rhythm of my own racing heart. I perched on a fallen log, while Ethan spread out maps and documents on a flat rock, his hands moving with methodical precision. Every glance at the paper, every folded corner and highlighted route, reminded me how far this weekend had drifted from the idyllic retreat I had imagined. "We need to be discreet," Ethan said quietly, not looking up from the map. "The first priority is moving you and your grandchildren without alerting Lucas. If he suspects anything, it could compromise the entire plan." I nodded, trying to absorb the magnitude of the situation. My stomach twisted with a mix of fear and resolve. The thought of the children back at the cabin, blissfully unaware of the danger, sharpened my anxiety. I would not let them know, not yet, not until we were safely away. Ethan tapped a route on the map, tracing a winding road that led from the cabin through a series of small towns before connecting to a main highway. This path avoids any potential surveillance points. It adds some time, but safety is worth it. I swallowed hard. "How long do you think it will take?" "Depends on stops, traffic, and what we encounter," he said. "We need windows where you're least likely to be observed. Timing will be crucial." I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. It felt surreal to plan a move like this, an evacuation, as if we were fleeing from a war zone rather than a mountain cabin in the peaceful Blue Ridge. Yet the evidence Ethan had shown me left no room for doubt. Lucas wasn't just reckless. He was calculating, desperate, and willing to manipulate everything and everyone to get what he wanted. Ethan's next gesture made my stomach twist further. He handed me a small notebook with names, addresses, and phone numbers, safe houses, contacts, and emergency lines. "These are people you can trust. None of them are local, so it reduces the risk of being followed." I glanced down at the pages, my hands trembling. I had trusted Lucas implicitly. He was my family. And now I was treating him as a potential threat, planning to slip away under the radar. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on my chest, but alongside it came a spark of determination. I would protect my grandchildren, no matter the cost. Ethan looked up, his dark eyes meeting mine with unspoken urgency. "We'll need to pack essentials quietly: food, clothes, medications, and any documents you may need. Nothing flashy. If he notices, it could all unravel." I nodded again, my mind racing through possibilities. I imagined Emma carefully packing her small stuffed animals into a bag, Lucas's jacket tossed carelessly into the trunk, their laughter echoing without suspicion. Keeping them unaware was necessary, but it felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong step, and the weekend's fragile safety would shatter. We spent the next hour going over every detailed departure time, road conditions, contingency plans if we were spotted, and signals to communicate without raising alarm. My pulse never slowed. Adrenaline hummed beneath my skin, sharpening my senses, making the forest around us both a sanctuary and a prison. Finally, Ethan closed the map and leaned back, exhaling slowly. "We're ready. The plan is solid, but execution will require patience and vigilance. You have to trust me and trust yourself." I felt the weight of the moment settle into my bones. My life had shifted in a few hours from calm family warmth to a dangerous dance of strategy and survival. The mountains, once a retreat, now felt alive with hidden threats. Every shadow and distant sound a potential sign of danger. I nodded, resolve hardening. "We'll do it. We have to." Ethan allowed himself a brief, approving smile, then rest for a few minutes. "Soon, we move, quietly." I looked back toward the cabin, where Lucas and Emma played under the sun, unaware of the storm about to sweep through our lives. My chest ached. A mixture of fear and fierce determination. We were preparing to escape someone who knew our every move, and there was no turning back. The narrow valley appeared just as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. Ethan guided the SUV along a winding dirt road, the headlights illuminating the dense foliage that framed the path. My hands gripped the edges of my seat, knuckles white, every muscle taut with the lingering tension of the escape. Lucas and Emma chattered softly in the back, oblivious to the danger that had hung over us all afternoon. I glanced at them through the rearview mirror, a pang of guilt twisting in my chest. Finally, the cabin came into view, a modest structure tucked between towering pines, its exterior weathered but well-maintained. Smoke rose lazily from the stone chimney, signaling warmth and habitation. Ethan slowed the vehicle, pulling carefully into a gravel clearing. "Here," he said quietly, "safe for now. No one knows this place except a handful of trusted contacts." I exhaled, the first real breath I'd taken since the plan had been set in motion. The air smelled of pine and earth, crisp and grounding, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to imagine that we were simply on a weekend retreat. But the weight of reality settled back immediately. Lucas, my own blood, had betrayed me. The thought of his calculated deception cut through any illusion of safety. Ethan led the way as we unloaded the car, carefully carrying bags of essentials and documents. The children scampered ahead, laughing at a squirrel darting across the path. I forced a smile, letting them believe we were simply exploring the cabin grounds. I would protect their innocence at all costs, even as the truth of our situation pressed down on me like a storm cloud. Once inside, the cabin's interior revealed a cozy simplicity, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms with clean, neatly made beds. I sank into a worn armchair by the window, staring out at the darkening valley. The sun had vanished behind the peaks, leaving the world bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Ethan set a bag of documents on the table. "We'll review everything carefully," he said. "Tomorrow, we begin the next steps. For now, rest. You've earned it." I nodded, though sleep felt distant. My mind swirled with reflections of what had brought us here. Memories of Lucas as a boy, the gentle hands that held mine, the eager questions, the shy smiles clashed violently with the image of the calculating, desperate figure who had nearly turned my life into ruin. I thought of my late husband, of years spent building trust and stability for my family, and the bitter sting of betrayal that now seeped into every thought. Yet, amidst the fear, there was a fragile thread of relief. We had reached a place untouched by Lucas's reach, a temporary haven where the children could remain safe and unaware. The threat was not gone, but for the first time since that message arrived, I felt a measure of control. I turned to Ethan, who was quietly organizing papers at the table. "Thank you," I said, voice barely above a whisper, "for everything, for coming when I didn't even know who to trust." He offered a faint smile. "You're the one who made the right choice. You acted on instinct, and that saved us valuable time. We'll need that clarity moving forward." I sank deeper into the armchair, letting my gaze wander to the forest outside. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying both the serenity of the mountains and the subtle unease of what was still to come. I knew this safe house was only a pause, a momentary respite before the next phase of confrontation. And yet, for now, I allowed myself the quiet comfort of being here, together with Lucas and Emma. Safe, if only temporarily. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of timber settling in the evening chill. I sat at the small wooden table. The documents Ethan had collected spread before me like a battlefield map. Every sheet, every printed email, every forged signature was a reminder that the betrayal I had feared was far more severe than I had imagined. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me sift through the papers. "Take your time," he said quietly. "I want you to see everything for yourself." I nodded. Though my hands shook, I began with the altered wills, comparing them line by line with the copies I had signed months earlier. The differences were subtle, almost invisible at first glance, but deliberate and insidious. Clauses had been rearranged, new language inserted, creating the illusion that I had willingly handed over control of my assets to Lucas. My stomach turned as I realized the extent of the manipulation. It was not merely financial theft, but a calculated assault on my autonomy, my agency, my life. Next came the emails. I read the correspondence between Lucas and his associates. The words crisp and precise, revealing plans to cover debts, to divert funds, to act before anyone could question him. Each line felt like a knife slicing through the trust I had placed in him. I had nurtured this boy, protected him, believed in him, and now he had weaponized that bond against me. I paused, pressing my palms to my eyes, trying to block the sting of tears. Anger flared, hot and raw, igniting a fire I hadn't felt in decades. The warmth of the safe house offered no comfort against the cold truth the person I had loved most, the one I had trusted unconditionally, had turned into the greatest threat I had ever faced. Ethan moved closer, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. I know it's overwhelming, seeing it laid out like this. It's hard, but knowing the truth gives you power. You can respond, and you can protect yourself and the children. I looked up, meeting his steady gaze. The clarity was frightening, but necessary. I saw now that every insistence Lucas had made about updating documents, every subtle push for access, was part of a larger, malicious design. The emails revealed not only financial recklessness, but premeditation, planning that extended beyond immediate needs and into the realm of danger. I gathered the messages from his phone, text threads that seemed innocent on the surface, but were carefully crafted to mislead, manipulate, and control. Even the tone casual, almost playful, was part of the deception, designed to make me doubt my own judgment. I felt the betrayal cut deeper with every line, every proof that my intuition had been right. Ethan cleared his throat softly. "We've verified everything. The evidence is solid. No one can claim these documents or messages are falsified. Lucas's actions are deliberate." I exhaled, long and shuddering, feeling the moral shock settle into my bones. I had been forced to confront a truth I had never wanted to see. Love and trust are not guarantees of safety, and family can wield the closest knife. Yet beneath the anger and heartbreak, a strange determination began to take hold. Knowledge was power, and while the betrayal was deep, the awareness gave me something I had lacked until now: control. I gathered the folders, tucking them carefully into my bag, my hands still trembling. The safe house was quiet, but the storm outside was far from over. I would need every ounce of courage, every strategic choice to navigate the danger that lay ahead. As I stood, readying myself for the next steps, I realized that this betrayal, however devastating, had also given me clarity. The path forward was still uncertain, but now I could see it clearly, and I would not be a passive victim any longer. The quiet of the cabin was deceptive. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, But inside, every decision felt monumental. Ethan sat across from me, phone in hand, as we drafted the first calls. The gravity of the situation pressed down like a stone on my chest. I had never imagined needing to contact the authorities about my own grandson. Yet the evidence we had gathered left no alternative. First, Ethan said, we notify local law enforcement. They'll open a case file and provide immediate protective measures if necessary. Then, we engage a lawyer experienced with elder financial abuse and estate fraud. We need legal shields in place before any further moves are made. I swallowed hard, nodding, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. The thought of Lucas, my grandson, having already manipulated documents, emails, and financial channels made my stomach churn. But seeing Ethan's calm, deliberate focus offered a sliver of reassurance. He had navigated situations like this before. I had to trust his judgment. I dialed the local sheriff's office, my voice trembling slightly as I introduced myself and outlined the situation. The officer on the line listened patiently, taking every detail with meticulous attention. Once the call ended, Ethan leaned in. They've assigned a detective and a case officer. They'll coordinate with us discreetly, ensuring your location remains confidential. This is the first protective layer. I exhaled slowly, a small measure of relief threading through the fear. But it was tempered by the knowledge that legal action alone could not undo the immediate threat. Lucas's desperation made him unpredictable, and even with authorities aware, vigilance was essential. Next, we contacted Sarah Whitfield, an attorney recommended by Ethan. Within the hour, she was on the line, her voice firm and professional. She requested all documents, emails, and evidence we had compiled and began outlining steps to secure temporary restraining orders, freeze access to accounts, and contest any altered wills. We act quickly, she said. Every hour counts. We're aiming to preempt any attempt he might make to accelerate his access to assets or compromise your safety. I listened intently, absorbing the legal terminology and strategy, each word a reminder of how deeply my trust had been violated. Yet beneath the tension, a cautious empowerment began to take root. Knowledge, combined with legal backing, was something Lucas could not easily manipulate. For the first time in days, I felt a small measure of control. Ethan and I spent the next hour planning practical measures. Safe transportation routes, contingency signals for the children, and secure storage for critical documents were mapped out. We reviewed scenarios, each more intricate than the last, imagining possible responses to Lucas's potential moves. It was exhausting, both mentally and emotionally, but necessary. By the time dusk had fully fallen, a sense of grim determination settled over me. The safe house, the police, the attorney, they formed a fragile but real buffer against the threat. My mind raced with strategies, backup plans, and the awareness that every step from here would require vigilance, courage, and unwavering resolve. I glanced at Lucas and Emma playing quietly near the window, unaware of the storm we had prepared for. Protecting them, shielding them from fear and danger, had become my singular purpose. The law, with all its protocols and authority, offered protection, but it was not absolute. My own vigilance, combined with decisive action, was equally crucial. I straightened in my chair, letting the weight of the day settle slightly. The wheels were in motion. Police involvement, legal strategy, and secured measures. The confrontation ahead was inevitable, but I no longer felt helpless. I was armed with knowledge, allies, and resolve. The battle for control of my life, my family's legacy, and the safety of my grandchildren was underway. And for the first time since that fateful message arrived, I felt ready to face it. The night settled over the valley like a heavy blanket. Quiet and still, but inside the cabin, tension thrummed with every second. Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table, the dim light from the overhead lamp casting long shadows across the scattered papers and laptop screens. Each document, each email, each message we had gathered felt more urgent than the last. I traced my finger along the lines of Lucas's threats and financial maneuvers, heart hammering in my chest. His desperation is accelerating, Ethan said quietly, eyes fixed on the spreadsheet showing debts, deadlines, and payments he had manipulated. If we don't act before the week is out, he could escalate in ways that aren't just financial. I nodded, swallowing hard. I had known he was reckless, even reckless with money, but seeing the numbers debts to dangerous lenders, pending transfers, falsified agreements made the risk feel tangible, immediate. My stomach tightened with dread, a coil of anxiety I couldn't shake. This was no longer about paperwork or stolen inheritance. It was a threat to our safety, our lives, and the trust I had once placed in him. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his face. I've cross-referenced everything. The timing is critical. There are windows when he's most likely to act, and those align dangerously with moments when you'd normally be complacent weekend trips, the children's routines, even when supplies are delivered to the cabin. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The thought of Lucas exploiting our routines, of turning the life I had built for my grandchildren into a trap, made my chest tighten with a mix of fear and fury. My own flesh and blood, the boy I had raised, was capable of such calculated recklessness, and now it seemed the clock was ticking against us. Ethan's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. We need to prepare for contingencies. Safe relocation if he shows up. Emergency contacts. Law enforcement ready on call. We can't assume he'll stick to patterns we've predicted. He's desperate, unpredictable, and willing to risk everything to cover his debts. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of every hour that had passed since that first anonymous message. The mountain cabin, once a place of warmth and nostalgia, now felt like the eye of a storm, with unseen dangers pressing from every side. The children slept peacefully in the adjoining room, unaware of the storm that had enveloped their grandmother's life. Protecting them had become a mission, one that left no room for hesitation. Ethan spread additional papers across the table, highlighting critical deadlines, creditors demanding immediate payments, legal filings that could give Lucas leverage, and threats from associates who had already hinted at using force. The lines on the spreadsheet seemed to pulse, a countdown to potential catastrophe. The more we delay, the more room he has to maneuver, Ethan said, his tone steady but urgent. Every hour is a risk multiplier. We need to anticipate every possible move, including scenarios we haven't seen before. I drew in a long, shaky breath, letting the urgency solidify into determination. Panic clawed at me, but beneath it was resolve. Lucas might have been my grandson, but his choices had stripped away the comfort of familial trust. Now, the stakes weren't abstract. They were immediate, pressing, and dangerous. I glanced toward the window, the dark valley stretching beyond, peaceful, yet indifferent to the chaos we faced. I imagined Lucas pacing in some far-off town, desperate, devising his next move, counting on our ignorance. Every beat of my heart reminded me that the danger wasn't theoretical, it was approaching. Ethan, I said finally, voice tight but firm, we need every contingency ready. I won't let him manipulate or threaten us any longer. He needs to know we're ready for whatever comes next. He nodded, eyes narrowing in agreement. We'll tighten security, reinforce the safe house, and coordinate with law enforcement. Every detail must be double-checked. No room for error. I leaned back, mind racing through strategies, escape routes, and communication plans. The adrenaline hummed in my veins, sharp and insistent. Every decision carried weight. Every misstep could be catastrophic. Yet, beneath the fear, a steely resolve anchored me. This was no longer about fear alone. It was about protecting my family, asserting control over my life, and confronting a betrayal that had crossed the line from financial to personal danger. As the wind whispered outside, Ethan and I worked through the night, anticipating, planning, and preparing. The stakes had escalated beyond anything I had imagined, but one truth became clear the closer danger crept. The more determined I became to face it, head on. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, casting a soft glow over the papers and laptops scattered across the kitchen table. Ethan and I reviewed the plan again, each step deliberate, every contingency accounted for. The weight of what lay ahead pressed on me, heavy but oddly clarifying. Today was the day Lucas's desperation had reached a point where waiting any longer would invite disaster. Ethan's voice cut through the quiet. "We've coordinated with the sheriff and your attorney. They'll be on standby, ready to intervene the moment things escalate. You'll have support, but you'll be the one confronting him directly." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I had spent decades nurturing and protecting my family, and yet, here I was, preparing to face the grandson I had once trusted with everything. Fear gnawed at the edges of my mind, but beneath it, a steely resolve began to form. This confrontation was necessary not just to protect my assets, but to reclaim my dignity and assert boundaries that had been flagrantly violated. Sarah Whitfield, the attorney, appeared via video call, her expression calm and professional. "We've drafted the protective measures and secured temporary restraining orders. The police will coordinate to ensure no unanticipated interference. You must remain calm and deliberate. Stick to the facts, show the evidence, and avoid emotional escalation. He is desperate, and desperation can be volatile." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The words confirmed what I already knew. Lucas was not merely reckless. He was unpredictable and capable of dangerous acts. The plan had to be meticulous. Ethan handed me a small folder containing printouts of emails, altered documents, and text message threads. "Review these one last time. Memorize the sequence. You need to present them clearly. Every line counts." I held the folder close, feeling the paper's weight like the gravity of the situation itself. My eyes lingered on the familiar handwriting in some of the messages, the casual tone masking manipulation, the requests to act, the insistence on secrecy. It had been my grandson's voice, twisted into threats that now dictated every choice I made. We practiced the timing, mapping the approach to the meeting location, coordinating hand signals, and confirming that law enforcement would remain discreetly positioned. Every detail was rehearsed, every possibility accounted for, yet the unpredictability of Lucas's actions loomed over us. I felt my heart hammer in my chest, a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Ethan spoke softly, sensing my inner turmoil. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's taking action despite it. Remember why you're doing this for you, for the kids, and to set limits that protect what's rightfully yours." I nodded, drawing in a deep breath. The children were still asleep, oblivious to the tension that had gripped the cabin for days. My protective instincts flared, anchoring my resolve. They had to remain safe, shielded from the storm. While I confronted the reality of betrayal head on, we went over the evidence again, line by line. confirming the accuracy and relevance of each piece. I felt a surge of moral clarity, an understanding that facing Lucas was not just about legal recourse, it was about reclaiming my voice and asserting that manipulation and deceit would no longer dictate my life. By mid-morning, the plan was finalized. Law enforcement was briefed. The attorney confirmed every protective step, and Ethan had established secure communications for contingencies. I took a final moment by the window, looking out over the valley below. The sun shimmered on the distant peaks, serene and indifferent to the personal storm I faced. I folded the folder carefully, tucking it against my chest. The confrontation would be tense, and fear would surely rise in waves, but beneath it, I felt a firm, unwavering resolve. This was my family, my legacy, and my life. I would face Lucas with courage, armed with truth, evidence, and allies, prepared to reclaim the control that had been so callously threatened. The hour of reckoning approached, and for the first time in days, I felt fully aware, fully present, and fully determined. The drive to the outskirts of town was tense, each mile marked by a mounting awareness of the stakes. Ethan navigated the winding roads with precision, eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirror. I gripped the edge of my seat, feeling every turn reverberate through my chest. The quiet hum of the engine was a thin veil over the storm of anticipation swirling in my mind. We had confirmed the location, an isolated estate, far enough from neighbors to prevent unintended witnesses, but close enough for law enforcement to respond swiftly if needed. Every detail had been mapped out: the arrival route, the positioning of officers, the signal for immediate intervention. Yet despite meticulous planning, the uncertainty gnawed at me. Lucas was unpredictable, desperate, capable of anything. Ethan glanced at me, reading the tension in my posture. Stay calm. Stick to the plan. The moment you step out, focus on the evidence and the facts. Let them speak for themselves. I nodded, though my pulse raced. The weight of the folder in my lap, the printed emails, text messages, and altered documents felt like a lifeline. Each page was a testament to the truth, a shield against deception. And yet, knowing Lucas's resourcefulness, I could not dismiss the possibility that he had contingencies of his own. The estate emerged over the crest of the hill, bathed in early afternoon light. Its stone facade and sprawling grounds were deceptively serene, betraying none of the tension that awaited inside. Police vehicles were discreetly stationed nearby, officers strategically positioned with clear sight lines to every possible approach. Ethan adjusted the plan one last time, confirming communications and signaling protocols. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. I could hear the faint sound of children playing in a distant neighborhood, a cruel reminder of what I was protecting and what could be at risk if anything went wrong. Every instinct screamed caution, yet I knew hesitation could be just as dangerous. As we approached the designated parking area, Ethan turned to me. This is it. From here, it's about clarity and composure. They'll step in if there's any sign of threat. You just stay focused on presenting the facts. I nodded again, closing my eyes briefly. My mind ran through the sequence one last time. Arrival. Introduction. Presenting the evidence. Remaining calm. Waiting for law enforcement to intervene if Lucas reacted. It was a mental checklist, a rhythm to steady the storm inside me. We parked at a safe distance, and Ethan handed me the folder. Everything you need is in here. The moment you walk up, trust your voice and the facts. Let them do the rest. I felt the air grow heavier with anticipation as I stepped out of the vehicle. The sun reflected off the gravel, casting sharp shadows that mirrored the tension I carried. Each step toward the estate entrance was deliberate, measured, a silent declaration of purpose. The officers remained unseen, a hidden net ready to catch any slip, yet I could feel the weight of the potential danger pressing close. For a brief moment, time seemed to stretch. Every instinct was heightened, every shadow, every sound, every distant movement. I reminded myself why I was here: to confront betrayal, to assert control over my life, and to protect those I loved from harm. As the front gates drew nearer, I could feel the storm about to break. The confrontation was imminent, the plan in motion, and the truth ready to face the deception that had lurked for too long. My heart pounded, but beneath the fear was a hard-edged resolve. Intervention was in place, the evidence in hand, and I was ready to meet the moment. The cabin loomed ahead, deceptively calm, its wooden siding blending with the dense pines. Every step toward it felt heavier than the last, each footfall echoing the tension coiling in my chest. Ethan's hand briefly touched my shoulder, a grounding presence. Before I stepped onto the gravel drive, police officers were positioned discreetly around the property, eyes alert, ready to intervene at the slightest hint of danger. Their presence was reassuring, yet it only underscored the gravity of the moment. I raised my gaze to the front door, heart hammering. Inside, Lucas waited, my grandson, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the one I had cheered at school plays, now transformed into someone desperate and dangerous. Every instinct screamed caution, every memory tugged at my resolve. Yet I knew I had to face him. Ethan signaled subtly, confirming the officers were in place. I opened the folder on my lap, letting the weight of the evidence steady me. Emails, text messages, forged documents, all meticulously compiled. Every line a testament to the truth I was about to present. I knocked on the door. A firm, controlled sound. Lucas answered almost immediately, his face pale, eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and anger. For a moment, the boy I had raised flickered across his features, and then it vanished beneath the tension. "Grandson," I began, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "We need to talk." I stepped forward, the folder in hand. He glanced past me, noting the subtle presence of officers around the property. Though they remained unobtrusive, Lucas laughed, a short, bitter sound. "So this is how it ends. You bring the cops and your little show of evidence." His tone was defensive, but cracks of uncertainty showed through. I exhaled slowly, opening the folder and spreading the pages. "This isn't a show. These are your actions, your debts, your manipulation. Look at the emails, the messages, the altered documents. You've risked more than money. You've risked our lives." He glanced at the papers, his posture stiffening, jaw tightening. I didn't mean." His voice faltered, betraying a mixture of fear and defiance. The realization of exposure had begun to sink in. Ethan stepped forward subtly, a silent reminder that the authorities were watching. "Ready," I continued, maintaining calm, forcing clarity into the chaos. "Every threat, every attempt to manipulate and deceive is documented. The police are aware. Your attorney will contest the fraud, but it's too late to hide. What you've done can't be undone." Lucas's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of consequences pressing down. For a brief moment, the room held still, suspended between confrontation and reckoning. I met his eyes, searching for remnants of the child I had known, while acknowledging the person he had become. I didn't know it would get this far," he murmured, voice cracking. "I was desperate. I thought I could fix it." "You made choices," I said firmly, though my chest ached. "Choices that could have cost lives, including your own. Desperation doesn't excuse betrayal." "Lucas," The officers shifted subtly, the tension peaking, yet contained. Ethan nodded once, and the message was clear: no sudden moves, no escalation. The evidence and authority spoke louder than anger or panic could. Lucas finally sank into the nearest chair, defeated, eyes downcast. I stepped closer, placing the folder on the table between us. "It ends here," I said, voice low but resolute. "You face the consequences, but there is still a chance to rebuild. Only honesty and accountability will carry you forward." He exhaled sharply, nodding slowly. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, relief edged into the room, subtle but tangible. The immediate threat was contained, the confrontation executed as planned. Yet the moral and emotional reckoning lingered. I felt the adrenaline ebbing, replaced by exhaustion, clarity, and a hard-earned sense of justice. Outside, the officers remained vigilant, their presence a quiet reminder that while courage and evidence could halt reckless actions, vigilance and preparedness were essential. The showdown was over for now, but the consequences of choices made in desperation would unfold in the days to come. I straightened, folding the folder carefully. The storm had passed, and yet, beneath the relief, a cautious awareness persisted. Justice, courage, and truth had prevailed this day, but the journey toward recovery, accountability, and healing was only just beginning. The morning air was crisp as the police escorted Marge through the cabin's threshold, a quiet sense of order settling over the mountain valley. Officers moved efficiently, securing the perimeter and ensuring that the property was safe from further interference. The tension that had coiled in her chest over the past days gradually eased, replaced by a cautious relief that felt almost fragile. Inside, Ethan guided her to a small table where law enforcement and legal representatives began cataloging evidence. The altered documents, emails, and messages that had once represented threats now served as proof. Tangible and undeniable. Each item submitted reinforced the reality Lucas's desperation had crossed the line into criminal acts. But the consequences were finally taking shape. Marge sat quietly, observing as officers methodically recovered assets from the cabin, returning what could be secured and documenting every movement. Her heart ached with the bittersweet knowledge that while justice had been activated, the trust she once held in her grandson was irrevocably altered. The items themselves, letters, photos, even small personal effects felt heavier now, each one a reminder of betrayal, mingled with memories of what had once been innocence and love. Ethan leaned close, speaking softly. "It's over for now. The immediate danger is gone. You did what was necessary." She nodded, swallowing back the weight of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Relief was real, but it was intertwined with grief. Grief for the family she thought she knew, grief for the choices that had led to this confrontation, and grief for the innocence lost on both sides. The police officers worked seamlessly, coordinating with the attorney to secure Marge's assets and ensure that no further unauthorized access could occur. The process was detailed, exhaustive, and deliberate, a procedural choreography that transformed fear into control. With each piece of evidence documented, with each account verified, Marge felt the oppressive weight of uncertainty lift, replaced by a sense of moral clarity. Justice was not abstract here, it was enacted, present in the officer's careful steps and the attorney's calm guidance. As the final documents were signed and verified, Marge allowed herself a moment to exhale, a long, shaky breath that seemed to release some of the tension embedded in her body for the past days. She glanced out the window at the valley beyond. Mountains bathed in morning light, serene and unknowing of the turmoil that had unfolded within the cabin. "Everything is accounted for," the attorney said, standing beside her. "Your assets are protected, and the authorities have all necessary evidence. Lucas and any accomplices will face legal proceedings." Marge's lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. The threat was neutralized, but the consequences of betrayal remained, echoing in her mind. She realized that while she had regained control over her environment and her safety, the emotional scars could not be erased so easily. Yet, amid the lingering ache, a quiet strength emerged. She had acted decisively, confronted deception, and ensured protection for herself and her grandchildren. Justice had been served. And while the path ahead would require careful navigation, she understood that courage and truth had restored a sense of order and dignity to her life. The mountain air felt lighter now, carrying the promise that she could begin to rebuild not just her assets, but her peace of mind and the boundaries she would no longer allow to be crossed. The mountain cabin was quiet now, the stillness punctuated only by the distant rustle of pine needles and the faint call of a hawk circling above. Marge sat by the window, watching sunlight dance across the valley, feeling the weight of the past days slowly ease. The adrenaline, the fear, the relentless tension, they were fading, leaving space for thought, reflection, and the subtle ache of relief. Her grandchildren's laughter echoed faintly from the back porch where they were playing, oblivious to the danger that had shadowed their weekend. Marge felt a protective warmth swell in her chest. She had acted decisively, confronted betrayal, and safeguarded the children and herself. The sense of empowerment was quiet but undeniable, a solid foundation forming beneath the lingering shadows of grief and disappointment. Marge's mind wandered to the lessons she had learned. Trust, she realized, was fragile but not entirely lost. It required boundaries, vigilance, and the courage to act when danger presented itself. She had been tested not just by the actions of her grandson, but by the choices she had to make under pressure. In those moments, she had discovered reserves of clarity and strength she hadn't known she possessed. Ethan joined her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did what had to be done," he said softly. "You protected your family, your home, and yourself. That's the mark of someone who knows her worth." She smiled faintly, letting the warmth of his reassurance settle over her. It wasn't the same as the innocence she had once assumed in her family, but it was real, earned, and deeply grounding. She thought of the future, the steps she could take to restore stability, rebuild trust where it was possible, and reclaim her life on her own terms. Marge closed her eyes and took a slow, deliberate breath. The mountain air filled her lungs with a sense of possibility. She could honor her instincts, her wisdom, and her courage. She could teach Lucas the consequences of actions without surrendering her dignity, and she could show her grandchildren that resilience, integrity, and clear boundaries were worth preserving. For the first time in days, Marge felt a quiet optimism. The danger had passed. The threats had been confronted, and though the emotional scars lingered, she knew she could heal. She was not just surviving, she was reclaiming agency, learning to trust herself again, and preparing to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long golden shadows across the cabin. Marge watched them stretch, steady and unbroken. And for the first time, she felt that same strength within herself. Marge woke to a crisp morning. The mountains bathed in gentle sunlight that streamed through the cabin windows. The quiet was no longer tense, it was serene. a reflection of the clarity she had begun to reclaim within herself. The past week's chaos had left its mark, but it had also forged a new strength, one she intended to carry forward. She moved through the cabin with purpose, arranging the small living space she now fully owned, not just in property, but in autonomy. Each detail, from the neat stack of files documenting the confrontation to the children's scattered drawings, was a reminder of both resilience and renewal. Ethan arrived with a cheerful wave, bringing coffee and updates on legal matters. "Everything is proceeding smoothly," he said. "Your assets are secure, and the authorities are ensuring compliance. You can finally start focusing on life beyond this crisis." Marge smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond relief. She had survived, yes, but she had also learned how to assert herself, to protect those she loved, and to navigate betrayal with courage. Today, she would reach out to the local foundation helping seniors at risk of financial abuse, offering her experience and support. What had nearly destroyed her now became a mission to help others, turning fear into empowerment. Later, she walked the quiet paths behind the cabin with Lucas and Emma, enjoying their laughter without the shadow of danger looming overhead. She understood that trust would take time to rebuild, even with family, but she also knew the foundation of her life was stronger than it had ever been. For the first time in weeks, Marge felt fully present, fully in control, and fully alive. The mountain air, crisp and pure, seemed to echo her resolve. She had faced deception, confronted danger, and emerged with dignity intact. As she watched the sun climb higher, illuminating the valley and the lives within it, she understood something vital. Even a life nearly shattered can be rebuilt stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than before.